The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. I hope you're all well. Welcome to the first show of the year. It's been a little while. I hope the new year has started well for you and that you had a good break. As mentioned on the last show, I think this year is going to be a bit of a challenge, not just for cannabis businesses, but for all of society. Everything seems a bit mental at the moment. Strange and uncertain times can produce surprising outcomes though, so hope springs eternal for us all. I renew my call at the end of last year that if there are any burning topics that you want answering, I really would welcome some suggestions. So please do get in touch by the usual means. Once again, this episode is sponsored by our very good friends at Lumino. We are talking about Mexico today, which has some interesting legalization plans and has a unique geographical position sitting nicely between North and South America. Lumino have hired for some early rec experiments across the world, including production and commercial teams. And they've also recruited sales and marketing teams in South America. So they do have quite a global outlook. They're always happy to chat. And as I always say, they're the nicest people in the business that I know. So as always, if you do need help with HR recruitment, please do get in touch with them at luminorecruit.com. And obviously, please do mention my name when you do. Now, on with the show. Enjoy. On today's show, I have José Lugardo and Anndrea Hermann. They are co-founders of HGrown Consulting, which is a hemp consultancy focused on Mexico. José, Anndrea, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. Anndrea Hermann here.
Cool. Thank you. José, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, no, pleasure. And where in the world are you both today?
Myself, I am in Chile, Manitoba, Canada. So I'm about 30 miles north of the North Dakota border and just trying to keep that wood stove going so we can keep the house warm as we have a winter storm coming through.
I feel your pain. I'm in London, similar weather. José, how about you?
I'm in sunny compared to you guys, sunny Mexico City. It's actually quite sunny for this time of the year here in the city.
Stop rubbing it in. That's terrible. Cool. Thank you. So good. Look, we're going to talk about Mexico today. It's very important in the whole cannabis puzzle. Lots of excitement last year. Let's see what's really happening on the ground, though. And before we get to that, though, it'd be good to know a bit more about the two of you individually. And maybe if you don't mind sort of telling us a bit about your background and how and why you got into this space. Anndrea, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from Joplin, Missouri, so I'm not Canadian by birth, but I call myself Canarican now as I hold dual citizenship and have now spent the majority of my adult life in Canada. I was fortunate enough to learn about hemp young when I was in high school. So already by the time I graduated in 1994, I was already on the hemp wagon and promoting hemp and speaking about hemp. And then when I got into university, I was fortunate enough to have a really great professor, Dr. Jim Jackson from Missouri Southern State University, who, when it came time for me to declare a major, nothing really rang true to me. And he said, well, I want to know what essentially makes you mad. Like, what out there in the world do you feel? What just angers you about what's going on in the world about something? Follow that passion. And I said, it's the hemp thing. And he said, well, go do something about it then. And so fortunately enough, with that support from him and further support from the university at the time, they saw that that was something that I could develop into. So I created a Bachelor's of General Studies surrounding hemp. And from that, I earned an internship working with a co-op of farmers in Canada. And that's really what changed my life and set me on a new path to really becoming a professional in the hemp industry. So I started my internship in the summer of 2001. And from that time forward, I was just completely plugged into what was going on in the hemp world, Canadian, US. I've served on the board of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. And now officially last month, I'm the longest standing voted board member of the Hemp Industries Association in the U.S., and have various accolades going along with that. First woman inducted into the Hemp History Hall of Fame, Lifetime Achievement Awards from both the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance and the Hemp Industry Association, and really just generally recognized as an international ambassador of the crop, helping whomever I can to make their hemp dreams come true. I am a full-time director of inside sales with HPS Food and Ingredients in Canada and part of the HGrown Consulting and launching HPS Latam in Mexico. So we're really working together to bring hemp foods and hemp knowledge into not only into Mexico, but into the supporting Latam countries.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a great pedigree, and glad we're going to get to hear some of your wisdom around hemp and some of the other stuff that's going on. Thank you, Anndrea. Jose, your turn.
My background is in biomedical sciences, healthcare for the most part. I went to school at the University of Florida in the US. I've lived in the US for a lot of years in my life. Early in my very short career, before moving into cannabis full time, I was lucky enough to meet doctors and patients. One in particular, Evelyn Rosenfeld, which is patient number 2 in the US. I don't know if people in Europe know this, but there is a very limited amount of people who were granted federal permits in the US, authorizations by the federal government. So when I met Irvin, I think that kind of did it for me, basically. He was very instrumental in pushing for legislation, in pushing for cannabis as a medicine, and obviously its adoption by the government. Later on, I was able to work in public policy, drafting legislation, giving advice on how to integrate cannabis and hemp into the Mexican society in a safely manner from the public health security perspective that the government wanted to push. So that's basically the extent of my work. And now more recently, I was able to open up the first cannabis clinic here in Mexico, and more recently working in hemp and making sure that, like Anndrea was saying, not only Mexico, but we've been getting questions about Latin America a lot recently. So we're trying to help other countries jump on the hemp bandwagon, like Anndrea is saying.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. So we've got the whole broad church of cannabis represented here in terms of expertise. And before we get into how that is sort of working in Mexico, maybe you can just tell us a bit about how you guys work together.
Jose and I are recent colleagues and friends, as we have a mutual colleague, Stephen Clark, which is one of the characters out there leading the hemp building, hempcrete side. So Stephen and I have been working together for a long time. So if you ever want to do an episode on hempcrete, please get a hold of Stephen. We can help you with some of those contacts. So Stephen and I have worked a long time on the hempcrete side of things because I have a background in the building aspects. And so when Moses, one of our team members from HGrown, knows Stephen, knows Jose. They didn't know each other. They kind of started talking. Moses said, let's start something because we really see that there's going to need to be somebody to step in as a guidance point to help these companies in Mexico and Latam figure out some of the nuances of import, export, food manufacturing, what's going on, the regulations, how do we fit in? And so Stephen said, well, if we want to do something, we really need Anndrea to come on board because she's going to bring in this institutional knowledge that none of us have when it comes to hemp. And then they have institutional knowledge that I didn't have. So from that, I got a call from Stephen, and Stephen said, hey, we want to do this thing. Would you come and join us? Over the years, I've been asked to join many different things and many things that never go forward. So I was kind of like, all right, let's see, is this real? Is this not real? And you never really know, even if it comes from somebody that you trust. And so I said, hey, let's see how it goes. And it actually really moved forward. The team that was brought together, a very diverse background team. And it's really been an honor to work with these fellas to develop the consulting side and just the work that we're being able to do. So that's how I came into the picture of meeting Jose and team as part of the HGrown.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cool. Well, that's great that you're working together, and then we can get on with talking about Mexico. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of excitement around cannabis legalization in Mexico, and it was a lot of headlines around that. And we'll talk about that in a second, but maybe we just start with hemp and, as it seems to be a kind of key area of expertise for you guys. What's happening with the hemp industry in Mexico? And then maybe we can also talk a bit about CBD and how that fits in.
Well, firstly, I'll just say that hemp foods are coming into Mexico. So there is a growing market in Mexico. And I say Jose, to elaborate a little bit more about what those regulatory affairs background is.
Yeah, so hemp is not illegal in Mexico. Like Andrea is saying, it has been imported legally for quite some time now in the form of seeds and protein, which are very much accessible to the Mexican population in the supermarkets, in several stores, several chains throughout the country. A lot of people have a lot of interest on the cannabinoid side of things. So I will just say very briefly that CBD is in transition. And while there are some products available in the local market, and this is expected obviously to continue to grow because it's already kind of starting to happen in several different companies. Each product has to go through its own authorization procedure with the sanitary regulatory agency here. So we are expecting a lot of these products to get to market, particularly some brands who have shown some interest from overseas, but also some players here in Mexico have shown that they have a very good strategy to bring products to market. So that's basically where we stand. Now, I just wanted to add real quick that our organization really is built on cooperation. And like Andrea is saying, there's a lot of diversity that we bring to the table. But this actually happened out of our own need to start building the supply chain from scratch. Basically, what we were discussing about hemp in specifically, But we knew that we couldn't do it ourselves. You don't just come in with like a large amount of money and bring and build a supply chain on your own. So we put together this consulting firm, which specializes in assisting other companies, both Mexican companies and companies from abroad who have an interest in the market. And now we have great partners who not only have they shown interest, but they also have very key experiences that they fill in a piece of the puzzle that we have to put together, whether it's developing a product or setting standards or machinery, equipment, capital, logistics, anything that we can do to start putting more products on the shelves here in Mexico. So that's sort of an overview of hemp as of right now.
Brilliant. Thank you. And so when you talked briefly about CBD and there are some products and that's got a regulatory oversight you need to authorize. Does that mean that are there black market products as well available at the moment, or how's that all kind of fitting together at the moment?
Yeah, Mexico is a very large gray market in the world. It's quite a large country. 130 million people live here. So one of the main reasons for this, in my opinion, is that the regulatory landscape has taken a lot longer than it should have, whereas in other places like in Canada, in Europe, where it seems like you guys put your mind into it and then you develop the process and then you understand what needs to be done, you ask the right questions and then you answer the questions, right? You implement the programs. Obviously, it's not perfect, right? But in Mexico, what happened was it's a very dynamic ecosystem where things have taken a lot longer than they should have. And this has basically caused a great market to flourish, not just in hemp, CBD, cannabinoid space, but also in medical cannabis and the adult use, obviously, as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's grey markets all over the world. And exactly that, when the regulations aren't clear, that's when that sort of messiness sort of thrives, I guess. You mentioned medical cannabis. What is the situation with medical cannabis in Mexico?
Well, medical cannabis rules were published in January 2021. With the pharmaceutical approach, the government put very strict requirements on the product development side of things, which has caused some challenges in terms of access, which is the most important thing when it comes to healthcare and medical cannabis. You need access, which has proven challenging for Mexico, to access to cannabis-based medicinal products, obviously. Prescription is required, but there is no list of qualifying conditions, as opposed to other countries which have tried to implement it, which is a positive. There is no administrative burden on patients, which is also positive. But the main road as of right now is through importation of finished products. It's kind of moving very, very, very slowly. Hopefully, once the public sector comes in, which it hasn't as of the end of 2022, then hopefully it'll get better.
Yeah, and so it's a private model mostly at the moment. Is that right?
Correct.
And where are they generally importing from?
Well, as of right now, you're seeing the very beginning of it, mostly you're talking Canada, you're talking a couple places in Europe for the most part, and Colombia.
Yeah, the usual suspects. Cool. Okay, well, thank you for that. Now the big one, adult use or recreational cannabis. What is the actual scenario? And maybe you could talk a bit about the announcements and what has and hasn't happened since those.
Yeah, you're probably referring to the end of 2021 where everybody, and this is not just me, I don't think I'm over or exaggerating this. I think everybody in the hemp and cannabis spaces thought Mexico was going to, as they say, go online, right? And what happened is the federal bill, the adult use bill that was going to basically approve adult use bill and obviously give and provide the right framework for industrial hemp was almost published and signed into law at the end of 2021. Now, it didn't end up happening due to timing issues within the Senate, which is where the bill is actually, as of right now, still. And now at the end of 2022, it's still there in the Senate. Now, I know people in Europe and the US with some experience know that political scenarios and dynamics come a lot into play with a very delicate subject from a public policy perspective. So it's quite challenging to get a federal bill approved. We are expecting it to happen soon. We just don't know when. But this would create a license-based system for adult use. Now, oddly enough, adult use cannabis was sort of the first one approved, so to speak, in Mexico. There are many people who can cultivate legally, exercising their human right to develop their personality. Also, some clubs are starting to create legal vehicles using a similar strategy, but you can obviously not sell cannabis in dispensaries in Mexico yet. And that's the status as of right now.
Yeah. I mean, this is a kind of common story. I think everyone hopes that legislators will move quickly, but they very rarely do. And in Europe, we've got a situation with Germany where everyone's very excited, but there's a lot of international treaties and obligations in that respect, kind of slowing things down. So no one really knows how quick that's going to happen either. Andrea, maybe get some input from you. With your North American hat on, with, Canadian and American hats, let's say, how does Mexico fit in that, and how can it play a part in that whole ecosystem?
Well, I feel it's important that, as we talk about North American grown, so not putting Canadian grown versus US grown. So it's a really important aspect for myself as we talk about this concept of North American grown and what we can do with the crop as growing for intent. So I feel that that's a very important point as we look at developing the hemp industry in various places around the world is what are we growing it for? What infrastructure already exists and where we're looking at, and what can we use that's already within those countries? So for instance, if you've got, another crop in Mexico that has a lot of co-products, I don't like to call things byproducts because byproducts is normally viewed as something that's waste. It's no good. So I like to use the concept of co-products that are coming off of this production and that we could do blending with hemp. So if we look at something like building, what can you blend hemp with to make a building material that might be coming out? So also people often think that, it's got to be 100% hemp. Well, no, you want something that you're going to be using the natural resources of the location and using hemp to help to use those resources that are coming off. So I feel there's a definite place for hemp in Mexico, Latam, as we look at, what can we not do in Canada, for instance. So if we look at Canada particularly, we have something called the list of approved cultivars. Only these cultivars, there's 80 plus some odd cultivars on there. And really we're only cultivating maybe approximately 20 of those. across Canada in general. Canada is very large. We have a very large environmental difference between Southern Ontario, let's say, and Northern Alberta. Well, Northern Alberta is not Northern, but mid Alberta, let's say, like agricultural land Alberta. So, those are different varieties that are grown. But for our sake, like looking, we can only import grain that's on that a list of approved cultivars or grow those varieties. So maybe there's an opportunity if we look at, something that's growing in the US where we can get that grain, but we can't bring it to Canada, even though it's absolutely food grade and fits all of the requirements as a safety quality assurance. And we tend to forget about, or people don't realize the amount of work that goes into clearing hemp seed grain for food production. And if it's, it's a wild weed just planted, it'll grow anywhere. You can harvest it, you can eat it, build your house. Well, yeah, but there's quality parameters that have to be met. So there is an opportunity at looking at, manufacturing in Mexico. We know that the cost could be lower there, but we could also, the cost may be lower, but it gives us an opportunity to maybe pay a higher wage in Mexico and make a larger sociological community impact by bringing production into Mexico. So that's one of the things that we've looked at also is like, how can we benefit communities, rural communities, those that may need that sort of leg up? How can we step in and look at how to use hemp, marijuana, cannabis as a genera nomenclature to improve the societal framework that we're working in? And I feel that's a really important piece as we start to look at the development of the hemp industry and this collaboration that's happened. And we've seen this strong collaboration with, European varieties, Canadian varieties being brought into the US, Canadian varieties, European varieties in Europe or in New Zealand or Oceania in general, and varieties coming from Asia back into other latitudes. So we already are seeing this really collaborative aspect about bringing those varieties across the border. So Canada has been very strong on helping develop, especially in the US market, bringing those varieties in. There are US varieties that have been developed. So I think that's a really important piece as we kind of help steward the next move of hemp, not only in LATAM, North America, but as an international crop.
Absolutely. And I would imagine, Mexico is much closer to the equator. There's probably some very good growing conditions for a lot of different varieties of cannabis and hemp.
Yeah, and in different economies of scale, right? So not everything has to be a large production. So if we look at this and look at, what does a community need themselves? Is this something where they need feed and fodder? Do they need animal bedding? Is this something where we can bring in a smaller type of production to make housing that's safe? Because one of the things that, when I've been in Mexico, it's almost all like cylinder block concrete. Well, what happens? You turn the air conditioner on, you get mold. Well, that's not a very safe housing situation. I mean, this is not isolated to Mexico by any means, but looking about how can we improve the health of people, hemp foods, hemp building, or adult access and adult chosen access for family members of medical side of cannabis. So how can we improve the health overall of society by using hemp as a bit of a catalyst to look at what else can we use? And how does hemp help that other thing move forward? And so we can help reduce some of those other waste streams that might be coming off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a slightly thorny issue, but how would a possible, legal market for recreational cannabis, how would that work with very powerful cartels in Mexico? Is that an issue at all, or is the government's looking at how to kind of handle that scenario?
Yeah, well, there's obviously that very delicate topic. It's not just delicate. I could listen to your voice and it almost seemed like you didn't want to say it, but it feels like all throughout the sector we have a challenge in accepting this topic, and I believe I'm one of the few, I guess, who believes in discussing it in the open, because it's one of those things that we have to get around one way or the other, and mostly because we're in one of these countries where we've suffered a lot caused by these unjust laws and the effect that it's had on millions of families here. So one of the things that I've worked on from the public policy perspective is helping the authorities understand that this is a challenge that needs to be talked about. And one of the aspects in the law that's hopefully soon to be published, ingrained in the law, is helping. It's bringing it a perspective of human rights, first of all, also the sustainable development approach, which is very, very critical for our government in all policies as of 2022. But the idea is very simple. You have communities who have dedicated to growing a crop, right? A very specific type of crop that's very profitable, or that has been very profitable, that has brought food to the table, that has brought some way to sustain the families in a lot of communities, in rural communities who have been disadvantaged in a variety of ways. Less access to healthcare, obviously the quality of the water, a lot of these challenges, lack of infrastructure, schooling is not the best, right? So if you think about it in this way, the government was trying to do is build it from the communities out. And the law says it, although it's not explicit in a way. And if you read the document, you might not think about it that way. But as I've worked with them in the office at the Senate, I can tell you that that was the approach. They know the violence is there. And one of the mechanisms is we need to help people who are willing to transition in the communities. And one of the best ways to do it, in our opinion, is to do it with hemp, which is why we're trying to work on a variety of different projects, but they all start in the fields, starting pilot programs, for instance, where we can not just educate the communities, but also how to help people transition from marijuana to hemp if the conditions are viable, if they're willing to do it. And there is some growing evidence, not just in Mexico, but also from the US, that when you do it, people actually are more open to work with the government and start receiving these support systems and getting access to the seeds and the knowledge. And if it's done the right way, it can put a significant burden, not just economic, but also a more psychological and social, because that's another key aspect of the violence side of things. I believe that the criminal groups or criminal organizations who still do it, they're not even in cannabis anymore. They're doing very ill-advised things, to say the least, extortion, human trafficking. And that's obviously not as exciting as sometimes the cannabis sector is portrayed. So in a sense, I think you can put a significant psychological burden and start distancing or helping people distance themselves from historically symbiotic relationships that they've had with organizations that are just not in their best interest. But it's very delicate. Like you're saying, it's very soon to know if it's going to be successful, but we're going to help at least advance the cause.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so. I mean, that's obviously a huge topic in itself. So one for another day, but thank you for giving that input. I'm conscious that we're just sort of getting towards the end. Just what are your kind of thoughts looking forward in terms of progression for Mexico in this area?
I feel that, Mexico can become a leader in, product development and the access to what, Mexico can impact the rest of the Latam Spanish speaking countries. Also in the US, we have a very large Spanish speaking heritage in the United States. They have access to these products. They want to send them home. They want to discuss this. So having Mexico be able to come on, have this diversity of the growing opportunities. And, this is saying, we see this now in Canada, the US, Europe, hemp and marijuana, it's there together. They're not hurting each other. It's a benefit because, obviously if you're needing medical cannabis, you probably need healthy foods and a healthy home. So there is that, as, Jose was saying, the symbiotic relationship that can occur. And I've always said, hemp doesn't belong everywhere in cultivation, because of the fact that marijuana and hemp, when you start talking about hemp as a grain crop, are different crops. Same nomenclature, but different production. So that's also looking at, as Jose was saying, regional, what's going on? Can we transition these growers from marijuana into hemp? Or is it best to look at these growers and say, hey, you grow female cannabis really well. Let's see what we can do to help better develop that and make it more legitimate so people can stand up and be proud of what they do. And at the end of the day, for me, that's what's most important, is the people can stand up and be proud of what they do, be out about what they do, comfortable about what they do, and then to see that benefit coming back to the community.
Yeah, thank you, Anndrea. Jose, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think Mexico, as everybody knows, is one of the top producers in the world. And we are very much invested in helping make sure that this happens in an orderly way, in a safe way, and that the government is a partner in this. But like Anndrea is saying, I also believe, and a lot of people in here in Mexico, you're gonna realize that a lot of us believe that it all starts in the communities. We all have families. As Mexican, I have families in rural communities with lack of access to services, water, etc. And it's about lifting them up. And I think that's one of the key aspects that I see in particular with hemp, because you can bring food, you can bring fibers, and then you can help bring pride to help change the story and how we've been told these lies over the past 100 years. And I think we can retell this story in a much better way for the next 100.
Absolutely. Breaking down the stigma. That's a great way to end the show. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate finding out a bit more about Mexico, and hopefully things will move a bit quicker. I mean, don't get me wrong, I speak to people from all across the world and it all seems to be moving far too slowly, but at least it's moving. But I hope the next time I speak to you that we've got a bigger update on what's happening over there. So thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.